The 4th of July commemorates the anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, a document officiating that the United States, or as they referred to back then, the 13 colonies, would engage in any means necessary to ensure nothing but independence from the Kingdom of Great Britain, and to create a land where liberty and freedom were the official policy, and that taxation would only be employed with representation. Now, as we know from history textbooks, war was the only way that this could be accomplished after continuous rejection from British Parliament and King George III, and hence this conflict became referred to as the Revolutionary War. Now, there's a whole video that needs to be done explaining the causes of the Revolutionary War. The primary reasons for a war being declared were what the colonies referred to as the Intolerable Acts, or a series of government fiats issued by Great Britain on the 13 colonies, which included extremely coercive taxes and legislation, such as the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, the Coercive Act, and many other bills which basically imposed heavy taxes as well as rather radical pieces of legislation on the population without their consent. Now, the first battle of the Revolutionary War was actually not in 1776. It was in 1775, towards the end of that year, in a battle called Lexington and Concord in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Basically, what happened was that a bunch of revolutionary rioters, including the Sons of Liberty and others, decided they had had enough of the British telling them how to run their colony, and so after the British supposedly tried to ransack their gunpowder shafts, colonial Minutemen, or the official soldiers of the Massachusetts colony, fired back at General John Pinckert, Thomas Gage, and other British soldiers, and that was when the first fighting of the Revolutionary War began. Very quickly afterwards, that battle was declared a colonial victory, or a victory for the Americans, or the Yankees, or the Patriots, as they were referred to back then, which was quite a surprise to Great Britain, considering they were the world's leading naval power at that time. It was even more of a shock to them when the Americans, or once again the 13 colonies, or the Patriots, beat them at the second battle, the Battle of Bunker Hill, which was meant to be a British retaliation for Allied shootout towards British forces. And ultimately, the Patriots, the Americans, were able to win that battle as well, another crippling blow for the incredibly indomitable British forces. At this point, this was kind of the furthest extent to which the Patriots would have easy victory against the British, as in 1777 and in early 1778, the 13 colonies, led by General George Washington, who had been made the commander of colonial forces, decided to engage in an invasion of British territory in Canada, the invasion of Quebec, alongside one of his most trusted generals back then, Benedict Arnold. And unfortunately, that campaign was unsuccessful. The British were able to push the American troops outside of the Canadian borders and back into upstate New York. At this point, the British began to seriously take the war as a major threat to their security and to their holdings on one of their most necessary colonial powers, the Americas, or the 13 colonies. And therefore, they sent one of their most trusted generals, General William Howe, to New Jersey in 1778 to squash any potential colonial rebellion in the Revolutionary War, basically to stop the war from going any further, as up until now, the British thought of it as just some tiny little skirmish they didn't need to be concerned about. Now, William Howe was a very interesting figure, let's just say that, for many reasons, which I'm going to elaborate on in just a moment. The first one is the fact that William Howe, when he landed in New Jersey, fought a battle known as the Battle of Trenton against the Patriot forces, the American forces. And even though it was considered an official Patriot victory, Howe was able to push them out of northern New Jersey, and they went on the run into the southern parts of Pennsylvania and out of the state. Now, what probably would have been the most strategic course of action would have been for Howe to chase them and to destroy one of the strongest Patriot battalions, which this one was. But for whatever reason, Howe let them escape. Now, Howe claimed that he did this because he actually sympathized with the Patriots, not for their cause of independence, but because he thought that they, at heart, were actually loyal to the British Crown, and that over time, they would slowly realize that their ideals were wrong and that they would eventually surrender before they lost the war. However, he thought that they needed some time before they would officially do this. This also explains why Howe didn't chase George Washington's forces in the harsh winter in New Jersey in 1778, known as Valley Forge, which killed thousands of Patriot troops because of the harsh winter and because of the terrible climate at which the troops were in the New England area. And also, when Howe decided not to assist General John Burgoyne and other British forces in trying to create an invasion from the north. Basically, the British were trying to engage in a strategy in which they would invade the colonial forces from New York in what was called a Quebec invasion. And that basically the British general John Burgoyne and Henry Clinton would invade from the north, and then William Howe would meet them up there from the south. However, at the last minute, Howe withdrew from that invasion and decided to reconquer Philadelphia. As a result, the British had no reinforcements and ended up being a decisive colonial victory. Essentially, General Horatio Gates, as well as Benedict Arnold on his side, were able to crush the British forces in the Battle of Saratoga, which became a turning point in the Revolutionary War due to it now having the French and the Spanish join the side of the 13 colonies in their waging for independence, as they saw their victory as a viable end goal of this war, something that was likely to happen and not just a long shot. Now, the British were pretty upset with Howe's recklessness and his complete, utter lack of regard for British strategy. And so he wasn't officially relieved of command, but much of the affairs of the war were shifted to another British general named Charles Cornwallis. Now, Cornwallis wanted to shift the trajectory of British strategy and instead send many Prussian mercenaries or hired troops into more of the southern regions of the US rather than try and reconquer from the north. Basically, Cornwallis had some successes, as in the late 1770s and early 1780s, he was able to conquer much of the southern portions of the 13 colonies and was able to push in against the Patriot forces in some decisive losses for the Patriots and victories for the British. As a result, the Patriots decided to completely change their leadership. They basically relieved Horatio Gates from his command in the South, and Benedict Arnold actually had already left command because it was found out that he was actually a spy for the British the whole time, and therefore he had to escape into British exile. Now, the colonies did themselves a huge favor by hiring a new brilliant general by the name of Nathaniel Greene. Greene engaged in backwards plots and forest junctures, different strategies to actually push the British out of their own land, in which you would have troops sneak up behind British forces in basic wastelands of South Carolina and North Carolina and attack them from behind, as well as use their own naval force against them. As a result, surprisingly, Cornwallis was basically pushed out of his own front in the southern 13 colonies, and eventually he was decisively defeated by Greene, Washington, and other generals at the Battle of Yorktown. This battle basically meant a complete end for British forces in the war and was ultimately the victory for the 13 colonies. Within just a matter of 2 years, the British would formally surrender, recognize that the 13 colonies were now an independent country referred to as the United States of America, and that they should withdraw all further British troops in surrounding lands, such as in the Northwest, in order to show that they fully believed that the U.S. was now an independent nation. And these talks were called the Peace of Paris, and they were primarily spearheaded by political genius Benjamin Franklin. And this all took place in 1783, and that was when the U.S. was officially declared independent. So even though we declare independence in 1776, the reality is the U.S. wasn't officially formed as an independent country until the British recognized them at the Peace of Paris in 1783. Overall, the Revolutionary War was a fundamental era in American political history